Brilliant. Thanks, Blake. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thanks, Charles, for making time for this. We're obviously very excited to be here. Today's session is going to be focused on how do you break into the North American market from a sales perspective. We're going to cover topics like lead generation, hiring, marketing, the technology you should be using. I have tons of questions for trial. The survey we ran with you guys obviously helped us curate those questions, but this is about equipping you guys for success. So if you have any specific questions, tell me to shut up and ask your questions. We'd love to get through them. And with that said, let's jump into it. So Kyle, firstly, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great. Okay, let's start with like a high level question. So let's start with a framework to get from 0 to 1. Signing up your first few customers is extremely difficult because you've got to get a prospect to trust you, right? You've got to take a leap of faith that you can deliver. You don't have many past clients to point to where you've been successful in the past. So that's hard on its own. And then when you're doing this in a brand new market, that adds another layer of complexity. So I think a good place to start is on a very high level, what is a framework these organizations should be using to help them get from 0 to 1 from a sales perspective?
Yeah. So one of the things that I hear young companies do in trying to find their first few customers is they're applying sales methodologies, frameworks. Their VCs are making introductions, and they treat it like a fairly linear sales process, when in fact it's basically the opposite of that. And you, in a lot of ways, have to turn off a lot of the sales instincts that you may have as a business and be really transparent with the prospects that you're going to engage with, and sell them on something that's quite a bit different. Essentially, you'd never do business with a startup. It's like, let's all be honest. I've been in a startup. I was on the other side getting us our first few customers, and then a lot more than that. There's no real reason to take that leap of faith, because the product is still going to be super buggy. That the founder's painting a vision and everybody's stretching things, and the chances are you could go out of funding in a round or two. So there's a lot of reasons not to do it. And what's not going to compel somebody to take those risks is a traditional cost value analysis. There's just no way you'd look at all those risks and take that leap of faith unless there was some other major motivating factor. And that other major motivating factor, I think, especially in that 0 to 1 phase, is belief. They believe that this company is doing something that the industry needs, is an unmet need. You find an individual that wants to be on the cutting edge. Like I'm a good example of a buyer on the other side of that. I've bought from a lot of really green startups because I believe in the startup ecosystem, and I want to support that. And so you have to lean into these other reasons to motivate people if you really want to get that initial traction. And so think about what that is. Like, think about what is your aspirational narrative? What is your David and Goliath framing? So, the industry's always been done this way. These set of companies are extracting an exorbitant amount of money from these types of customers, and it doesn't need to be that way. Like, that could motivate somebody to be like, yeah, you know what? Like, I'm sick of paying SAP. I'm sick of paying Facebook for every little ad that I run. So, like, what are these moments and framings that are a little bit more about a philosophical view versus a very transactional product value cost relationship. And the one other piece that I'll add there is those customers are going to know the product is going to be buggy and only part of what they really need. And so you might as well be transparent, because those initial customers are so critical. Bring them in with the right intention. Let them know it's like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what's built. This is what's not quite built. And we want you to be a part of this journey. Like, let them feel like they're a part of this company as a partner, and that will probably get you farther. And then you want to transition out of that to a better cost value conversation at some point. But in the initial few months and years, it is really about something different than a traditional sales process.
I think you said that's very interesting, and the specific point that when these early stage companies would come into you, you wanted to support the ecosystem and you were a buyer. Are there any tips on how to identify leaders and organizations that would be that progressive?
Yeah. You have to be where your buyers are and get deep with that ecosystem. So that's going to help you tremendously from a product fit perspective. There's a bunch of great reasons to always be really close to your customers, but you'll start to see who sticks out in those environments. People that are often like counter thinkers or are sort of like sarcastic about how things are done. People that have like a contrarian opinion. Those are great people to engage with, especially because if you think about a traditional sort of challenger methodology, those are your skeptics. And if you can get a skeptic to buy in, there's no better champion or partner to not only get a deal done with, but then sort of build a product with. Because those initial customers have to be advisors as much as they are like paying customers.
For sure. Does it matter if these organizations are large, medium, or small? Like, is it suggested that you go towards like smaller customers early on and you're going to have a better shot at convincing them, or you can find progressive customers across all small, medium, and large organizations?
Yeah, for small companies, they're going to be more oriented to working with other small businesses because they get it, like they're in that scenario. Yes, but then you have the counter pressure of every single dollar matters so much, and those customers can be quite unforgiving. But like it's a great place to play around, and especially if you're transparent up front and maybe those are your first unpaid customers and they serve as references. A really good fit is sort of medium-sized customers and your medium-sized companies, but you don't care about the company, it's the individual. Ultimately, like it can be quite a traditional company as long as you find a forward-thinking individual that is in a position of some influence. That it's cliche. People sell to people. You're not selling to a company. So you just need that individual person that potentially sees things different.
Yeah, and also I feel sometimes if you get stuck selling into the enterprise too early, your sales cycle is just so long that your repetitions of learning, it takes too long to really learn what's working, what's not in our sales process. You might as well focus on small and medium customers early on. And then once you've got some traction, shift over. Let's talk about lead generation. It's an area that early stage companies obviously struggle with a lot. You've only really got a theoretical value proposition versus referenceable clients. And so when you're at that stage, what are the channels you should be investing in to generate leads? And what are some things that you should kind of stay away from?
Yeah. Lead gen early is really hard. And it's very manual because if you're spending on traditional things like digital ads and you're driving people to a landing page, people are coming to that landing page with a certain expectation. And if they don't see any customer stories or any reference customers of note, then they're going to be reticent to fill out a lead form. So it is really quite manual, and a lot of it is either cold prospecting, and as a founding team, it's really important that we're doing that, or it's through your network. And that's challenging as European companies coming to North America. You're going to have to work harder at that, but it is doable, and you're starting in the right place with things like the DMZ. It comes with a good network. If you can get a North American investor, like lean really heavily on them for introductions, that's really going to be your best path towards people that are actually going to convert. Because again, like,
For sure.
I can have that conversation and say, hey, we're a new company. We've just found product market fit. We're thinking about the market in these ways, and we think you could be a customer that we build this thing with. It's hard to convey that message through a digital ad or at an event booth. You're looking for something really specific in this 0 to 1 stage, and then as you get those first few customers that are willing to be references, then the game changes, and you want to get out of only operating from references or from referrals and direct outreach as quickly as you can. But it's oftentimes really inefficient to spend in these models, and to do that well, you need a good demand gen person, and it's quite a bit of money. So it's a big upfront cost versus taking that burden as a founding team and doing the outreach.
Yeah, the toughest hire I think to make for early stage companies right now is a good demand gen person. Like the demand for those people is very high, and the supply of people that are very good at that job is quite low.
Yeah.
To just build off what Kyle was saying, one of the things we've seen early stage companies that are breaking into this market do that has helped them is, if you've already raised a round and there's some time between your last round and your next round, so you can't get a North American investor that you can leverage to get those introductions, you can still create an advisory board. So you would create an advisory board of leaders in that local market, and you would almost leverage them the same way that Kyle said you would leverage the investors to get these warm introductions and get some advice in areas that you needed. Let's jump into the cold outreach a little bit more. So, we know that we should stay away from focusing on digital ads till we get a little bit of traction. So we need to cold call, we need to do cold outreach. Usually it's founder-led sales very early on, and then once you've got some traction, you'll hire BDR, and then that BDR is generating more opportunities for the founders to engage and close. So let's look at this from a few different angles. If you look at BDR turnover at early stage companies, it's above 50%. Part of that is that these companies might not know what their ideal candidate profile is. They might not be able to equip those people for success. So with all of that in mind, when should a company hire their first BDR? What should they be looking for in that BDR? And what is necessary to have in place from an infrastructure perspective to give yourself a shot at holding on to this person longer than what most do?
Yeah. So this is my typical recommendation as well. You should always be founder-led. Hiring a first head of sales too early is a common mistake. Trying to go hire a high-priced account executive that comes with a Rolodex oftentimes blows up.
Yep.
So I agree with your assumption that the first sales hire is oftentimes best being an AE. I will caveat a lot of what I'm saying is I've never done much work with European companies coming here. So my lens is I spend a lot of time with startups. I do a good amount of advisory work, but any advice you get, always be critical of where it comes from and included other lines of thinking. But particularly here, know that my bias is I haven't worked with European companies. So my typical advice is the BDR is a great place because they're often less expensive. They can do a lot of work that gives the founder a ton of leverage. They're doing cold calls, emails, they're setting up meetings, they're preparing decks. Like they are really impactful. So if we operate with that assumption, then you're going to want to find somebody that has done the job at a high level for at least 2 years, I would say, and is getting ready to move to the account executive level. But that can't be their only reason to take this role. They have to fundamentally believe in what you're doing as a company, and they have to have a passion for startups. So I would be very weary of taking a Salesforce BDR who wants to leave Salesforce just because they feel like they want to be an AE and they think that a startup is the fastest path from BDR to AE. That's basically the worst possible profile you could hire for. They're used to all this, which you can't provide as a startup. They're used to the Salesforce ecosystem, et cetera. So what instead you're going to look for is somebody who's been a BDR in a slightly, in a more advanced maturity of a startup. They love startup world. They've done a bunch outside of their day-to-day BDR role and showing initiative. They made a sales deck because they thought it was interesting. They rebuilt their cadences at their previous company. They have to have that. They have to have that utility player type of mindset and be be, for lack of a better word, like a Renaissance person. And
Mm-hmm.
their sole interest is not just getting to account executive. It's being part of a startup and building, and that's really the profile you're looking for. And how do you
For
set them up
sure.
for success, I think, was the other part of that question. You're going to have
Mm-hmm.
to invest in a basic set of tooling. The good thing is a lot of that's really cheap now. You don't have to go all the way and invest in an expensive CRM. You can start with an investment in SalesLoft, and that operates as your pseudo CRM in the short term. That could be a great way. And then, buy some lists, and just know there's some other costs that are coming with it. And those will be high leverage spends. Those spends will give you a lot of output.
Yeah. Um, I think what you said about not hiring from like the Salesforces of the world is really important. Like a lot of companies early on will try to hire from a really fancy organization, whether it's the BDR hire or even their first full sales cycle hire.
Yeah.
But those people crash and burn in the startup world. You're looking for a trailblazer, almost a person who, once you're larger, will look lost in your organization. Like
Well,
they are built for those early stage companies. Let's talk a little bit about um, sales leaders. Back in the day, like even a few years ago, you would see a lot more heads of sales at companies that had under $1 million in revenue. And then now there seems to be this trend towards working with a fractional head of sales or using a sales consultant till you get to $1 million. And then you're able to raise around, you have some more traction, you can attract and pay for a great sales leader to take you from 1 to 5 million or 1 to 10 million. Which school of thought do you agree with, and why?
Uh, no one likes this answer, but it depends. It depends on your market, your product, how much traction you've got. If you're selling closer to the enterprise, and that is, then you're going to have a hard time figuring that equation out without somebody who has a little bit more chops. My default answer is, as long as you're honest with people when you're hiring them, it's no problem to hire like a head of sales that you're going to layer at some later point. So you
Mm-hmm.
could find somebody who's been a sales manager, for example, somewhere else. And because what you're worried about is the company outgrows that person, and you're stuck with that person as a head of sales, and you have to let them go, or you layer them and they're really upset. So in order to prevent this cycle, what you want to do is you can hire somebody. You can say, hey, we're going to let you build the sales engine. You're going to get a bunch of really cool experience. You're going to be our top sales leader for some period of time. And if you can keep growing in your role as the company grows and as the role grows in demands, then we want to keep letting you go down this path. However, it's most likely that at some point, if we're successful and you've done a great job, then this company is going to really necessitate somebody with some serious firepower. And we should understand that up front and be okay with it, and see that as a really exciting next step together. Because, if you're taking somebody who was a sales manager and now they're head of sales, well, they're not really like a VP of sales if they've got a team of 10. They're just their sales manager who happens to be the top person. And so ego, in the sales profession is still a challenge. So getting ahead of some of those conversations and just being honest with people about how you're approaching growth is really important. So you can hire, this is sort of a long answer to, you can hire a head of sales, but I wouldn't go hire a VP of sales from another large organization as that early stage customer or early stage employee. I would hire a manager type. They can operate as a head of sales. And then you definitely want to stave off that like VP hire who's going to be hard to layer and hard to replace until you're even like a decent amount more established than $1 million a year.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's also, you can afford that person at that point. You know, the people that are really good at that pure sales leadership role, they cost a lot of money and there are very few of them in the market. So you've got to make it very compelling for them to join. And so you need resources for that and you need traction for that. So wait it out before you invest in a VP of sales. But yeah, as Charles said, like you can always bring in a sales manager to get you to a certain point. You touched on this a little bit earlier, but this seems to be a conversation happening right now. So I want to dive into it a bit more. It's around sales methodologies. So there are a number of firms like Force Management and the Challenger Group that can come in and they can teach you their sales methodology tailored to who you are and what you do and who you sell into. Some say that this should be a very early stage investment, so you're giving yourself the best shot at success. Others say you should avoid this expense till you've got some more traction, till you've raised around, till you're actually hiring salespeople for your team. How should companies be thinking about this? Because I've heard this conversation happen online for a while now, and there doesn't seem to be like a set answer to it. So what's your perspective here?
So when I saw this note in your email before, I was surprised that people suggest Challenger and Force Management early, because I really don't see the rationale there.
Yeah.
You're going to be changing your product positioning, sales motion, target market, like every 3 to 6 months as an early stage company. So that money you spend is basically irrelevant in maximum 2 quarters. Even when we were, at a $10-15 million run rate when I was at League, our positioning changed significantly every 6 months, like every 3 months at times, because you raise money, the bar goes higher, you want to go after bigger, more complex customers, or you want to sell a larger solution. So those expenses are really like a late stage maturity thing for me, like Series B and beyond, to be honest. And the only the reason that I would see somebody want to make that investment is they don't necessarily want to really early, is they don't necessarily want to do the work in figuring this out for themselves. And I have a fairly long rant that I give to founders that I work with, is like, sales is not fun as a founder, especially if you're a product person. It's like not something that is like natural for a lot of us, and you just have to do it. Like there's just no other way than to step in as the CEO or the COO and really have a super active role in figuring this thing out, because it'll make you better at building products, because you'll understand what sticks in the market, what doesn't stick. It'll give you a lot of roadmap clarity. It'll help you in terms of marketing, your positioning. Like every part of your company gets better as the CEO or the C-suite gets closer to customers and tries to get somebody to sign the dotted line for the thing that you're building. So I would lean in there. The thing that I do say is an interesting investment early, if you want some help on this, would be like an advisor, a fractional leader, somebody like that. And I have another point of view, which I can get on a tangent about, is like, don't be super stingy with the points early. Like if you, through the DMZ, meet somebody that could be really valuable, whether it be, an accomplished marketing leader, a sales leader.
Oh, we lost Kyle.
We lost for a sec?
I think so. What do we do here?
Maybe we can wait.
Maybe you can message Kyle on the side and like tell him to sign off and sign back.
Thinking.
Am I back?
Kyle, you're back. There we go.
All right. So let me know.
Talking about the points, and I thought that was a really interesting point. So keep going on that.
Yeah. So if you meet a really great sales or marketing leader, or if it's a product person, try to establish a relationship with them. Meet with them monthly. I have some companies that I meet with every 2 weeks. You give them a point, or maybe it's even 2, and like it feels like, oh my God, my cap table, like no one's going to invest in me if I've got these advisors with like points here and there. But ultimately, like that's going to keep people really engaged, and those are like those allocations are going to get so diluted over the course of a bunch of rounds anyways. so that if it works, fantastic, that individual's probably being a part of you getting there. And if it's not working, you just end the agreement and they've vested whatever they've vested, because it's going to be, like a point over 3 years. So if it's not a great use of time, you sever the relationship after a year, they walk off with a third of a point that gets diluted over time, like whatever, it's really not a big deal. I think that's an underutilized asset for a lot of companies. And you mentioned advisory board. That's another version of it, but I think I see the engagement wane without something like tangible.
For sure. Having advised startups myself on both models, I've been paid for it and been given equity for it. I realized that being paid for it was less exciting. Like over time, you're like, when you're busy and you've got a lot going on, you just feel a little bit less connected to the mission. When you've got the points, you feel like you've got this vested interest in their journey and you're a little bit more all in with it. So it's a good model to use. Let's talk a little bit about marketing. So, these organizations have some traction, they have some resources to invest in sales and marketing, but they have limited resources, so they've got to be careful. You spoke about this a little bit early on as well, but let's kind of build on it more. So what's the trigger at which point you start marketing? And what type of marketing is important till, let's say, $1 million in revenue? Should you be doing webinars? Should you be doing search, marketing, search engine marketing? Should you be on LinkedIn? Like, what should you be doing?
So it depends on your customer segment. It depends on your deal size. The smaller the deal size, the more important demand gen and marketing is going to play in your overall go-to-market motion. It's hard to say without knowing lots about the individual customer, like how plentiful is this group of individuals that you're trying to sell to? Are there partnerships that you can engage with to piggyback on? Like there's a lot of moving pieces. I would say the thing to keep coming back to when trying to decide on marketing spend is how do you spend time with people in your market in ways that is more substantial. So that's like webinars, partnership activities, events, like going and attending events or doing like really small sponsorships that get you in the door to have you spend time with these individuals. I would opt for things that get you in a room more frequently than things that are like really top of funnel oriented, because like unless you're spending a lot of money with a demand gen person that knows how to set up the infrastructure underneath that digital spend, it can be really challenging unless your product is super duper compelling and it's just like, oh, I would be an idiot not to download that free trial or offer or whatever it is. So if you're a little bit farther up market, mid-market or small enterprise, it's spend that gets you in the room. And I would likely hire a really great demand gen person before a VP of sales, before like a higher priced head of sales.
For sure. There's this book called Sales Acceleration Formula, in which the ex-CRO of HubSpot talks about the ideal interaction between a sales professional and a buyer, which is similar to how a doctor interacts with a patient. And I think the basis of that is that buyers like to buy from people who are experts. And so to what Kyle was saying early on is you need these companies to take a leap of faith early on. And if you can come across as a subject matter expert in your space, your ability to actually convert that interest or that respect into a buyer, it becomes significantly more increased. So webinars are great. Giving talks, sitting on panels, that type of stuff is amazing. You spoke about sorry?
And don't underestimate social media in this regard. Yeah. I mean, like if you're a founder, it means you have an opinion. You have an opinion on something that you don't think is right in the market. It's either a need or something you think can be done better. And you're probably very deep in that area. You've got some like earned secret. And so don't be afraid to like use your voice on LinkedIn, on Twitter, depending on your target customer, and like engage in conversations, have an opinion, I hate the word controversial because it seems so cliche, but like, don't be afraid to share an opinion that could be counter to the ongoing narrative, like all that stuff can go a long way, because again, you're trying to establish establish yourself individually just as much as the company.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is one of the most underrated content platforms out there. Kyle, you must have seen this with some of the stuff you've posted, but I'm fairly active over there, and I can get about 20,000, 30,000 views on a post that took me 15 minutes to write, and I just put it out there. To get that type of engagement on some of the other platforms, the amount of money and effort you need to put in is significant. So LinkedIn can be leveraged a lot to increase your brand recognition and your brand perception in the eyes of potential investors, buyers, and even future talent for your own teams as well. Kyle, let's talk about LinkedIn more though. So what should one not be doing on LinkedIn? Because we see a lot of early stage companies make a lot of mistakes on LinkedIn. So what are the do not do this type of thing?
There's a lot, because LinkedIn sucks a lot of the time. Talking exclusively about your product and using it as a place to just like rant about any and every feature. So in general, anything really dressed up and not very genuine is probably not going to go great. So if you're like saying market platitudes or stuff that like every speaker on the circuit is circulating, or if you read 0 to 1 or like high output management, or if you read sales acceleration formula and then you're just basically paraphrasing stuff you're reading these books and putting them online, like none of that is really tangible or interesting for somebody. But like, what do you really think? Like, what are the things that you tend to disagree with when you talk to your CEO buddies or people that are in your market? Like when you were in the market that you're now trying to disrupt, what are the things you would disagree with people on? Like those are things that, because if there's disagreement, it means there's some reason to discuss. Those are things that can go a long way. Like share an opinion, have a view, like show your personality. It doesn't need to be this like super buttoned up place where we like talk in cliches, which is oftentimes what LinkedIn turns into. So I would say my general feedback is have a personality, start a conversation, engage. Like if somebody says something about your technology space that you don't agree with, like tell that person why or why not. Like, hey, actually I think about it very differently, and this is why, and these are the reasons. Like that can go a really long way. Those types of backs and forth can get a lot of attention, and you're going to attract like the people that are going to see that and are going to be like, yeah, like I've always said that. Those are your first buyers. Those are your 0 to 1 buyers. The people that are, you say something, you engage in a dialogue, you have a counter opinion. The people that hit that like button on your thing, like those are your 0 to 1 people. The people that respond to your comment, those could be your 0 to 1 customers.
For sure. One of the tactics that worked really well for me early on when I decided to kind of lean into LinkedIn was I was building a following, I was building a presence over that. And I would follow people that were thought leaders in my space or in the spaces that I wanted to deal with. And if they post something, write the most intelligent comment on their post. That comment is going to get 3 or 4 likes and become the #1 comment on that post. If 20,000 people are coming to that post, they're all seeing your name, they're all seeing what you're saying. And then they start like this mini conversation within that post around that perspective that you've shared. So that other than just posting your own content, do engage heavily with other people. LinkedIn actually doesn't reward your own posts till you actually engaging with other people's stuff as well. The other thing to kind of build on is webinars. So I think early stage companies or companies across all stages, they try to like their webinars are them selling themselves. And I think about it from a buyer perspective. Like I don't want to hear about your product for 1 hour, like unless it's a training webinar or something of that sort. Bring thought leaders from your space together and have conversations around some of the more interesting areas of discussion in your space. People will want to see that, and you're kind of putting yourself at the edge of the conversation. You're facilitating it. You're building your brand recognition and perception in their eyes. That's a way better strategy for webinars. We tried both at SDA. So we tried teaching our frameworks on a webinar, and we got like 50, 80 people on it. And we pivoted to doing these thought leadership ones, and now we get 400, 500 people attending those. And so that's something to think about as well. Kyle, let's talk about forecasting. It's if you ask any sales consultant, what do sales leaders and business leaders spend too much time doing? It's forecasting.
Yeah.
And right now it's really hard because of the economic environment we're in, right? So it's hard to forecast, it's hard to plan. When you're an early stage company and you're new to selling into this market, it makes it even harder. You don't know your sales cycles, you don't know your deal cycles, you don't know your the KPIs around your business or the process of it. So can these companies look at any benchmarks for things like sales cycles that can help them maybe do some planning? Or do you really only figure that out by trying to sell into the market and learning what's working, what's not?
Yeah. Forecasting is going to be so bad in the early days that you will definitely question why you bothered. Like, you're going to look at the model, you're going to look at the model you built and say, like, every single thing, every single assumption we made was wrong. Like, why do we ever do this? So forecasting always needs to be a living, breathing document. If you build a model at the beginning of the year to plan your spend around, and like that's the only time you're spending time on it, then that's going to lead you to challenges. You're going to want to build a model that you're going back to on a monthly basis to try to update with your best understanding of the market. Even if you have a sister company that sells almost the same product to the exact same buyer, potentially none of those assumptions will hold for your business for a myriad reasons. So you can start with some guesses, oh, it's a $15,000 product. I know this buyer, I've experience with this buyer. They tend to have a lot of influence internally. Maybe this is a 6 to 8 week cycle. You just have to consistently revisit as you go through your first quarter, second quarter of going to market with your best updated understanding of what's happening, and then look at what that new model or forecast is going to say. I mean, the other term for forecasting that you're using is you're trying to forecast what deals are coming in. That's the other version of forecasting. It's almost not worth doing. Like, it's worth doing. So these things are worth doing because it brings rigor, and these things are worth doing because it makes you think critically about your business and think about the inputs that lead to success. Sales cycle times deal size times top of funnel times conversion rates equals revenue, churn and whatever. Like that is the model of how I'm going to grow my business. So I really think the process of modeling and forecasting deals and thinking through that lens is incredibly important, but don't take that to your board, and don't, especially in the early days, plan a bunch of spend around it. Be like, oh, we can hire 10 devs. Like, this model says we're going to have another $500,000 in ARR coming in next quarter. Like, be very careful until you see things actually nearing the end and signing a deal before you plan any serious financial decisions on it. And it's hard because you have these two competing forces as a startup, where you hear like, grow faster, die, kick out the ladder. Like, you have to spend to grow, and you hear this from people around you and your board. And at the same time, like, you look at your burn rate and you look at what's coming in the top, and like, those things just can't both be true at the same time. So I'm of the mindset that I think we've like fetishized the whole like grow faster, die idea, and we don't think that you can become anything significant as a company unless you're going triple, double, or you're just like, you're hiring without abandon. I think that idea is sometimes overstated, especially in the early days, where you need to be really cautious with your capital. You need to be cautious with your spend. And what's the worst thing that happens? You don't spend quite enough money, and you're another 6 months to raise your Series A. Like, is that really the end of the world? Is that going to mean the entire market passed you by? Well, if that's the market that you're in, where it's so tenuous, everything needs to go perfect, like I would question the market that you've chosen.
Sure.
You want to find a little bit more greenfield opportunity than something like that.
100%. I was watching this talk over the weekend, and it was the ex-chief finance minister of Greece, and he said this thing where he's like, you can torture a financial model to tell you whatever you want to hear. And that's the thing about forecasting and models, right? So you've got to be careful. You've got to get a few cycles of it in to know that, okay, this is proven. We're getting this amount of traction. Now let's spend. I think the number one reason I've seen companies crash and burn is they hire too many salespeople too quickly. It really is. Like, you raise a round, you've had like 2 quarters of decent numbers, or even one, and now you're hiring 7 salespeople. Like, how do you ramp them up? Do you have enough leads for them? Like, your AEs are now doing lead generation. The amount of time you're spending on interviews to hire 7, who's focused on the rest of the business? Like, that's something that happens often and shouldn't.
One other thing there, like, we inverse causality. We think that sales reps create deals. That's not really what happens. As much as I would like to say that salespeople are magicians, and if you hire them, they'll go create revenue. Like, salespeople are successful because of the ecosystem that they're in, because you've got good product market fit, your demand gen people are getting traction, your founders understand the narrative that you're telling and how to position the product. Like, just be really careful that you understand that point, because like adding salespeople does not drive revenue. It does on your model, because oftentimes the financial model is built with like reps plus ramp time, average deal size equals like, oh, like sales reps equal revenue, but it's really not that. Sales reps need to catch capacity. In the early days, you want to hire sales reps at a speed where they're basically catching capacity that the company is creating. They're capturing demand, is the better word. They're capturing demand that the company is creating. You're off ramping more stuff from the CEO. You're off ramping more stuff from other salespeople. That's a great call out, Asad.
To kind of build on what Kyle is saying, there's this online, there's a website called actually this guy called David Scott. He's considered the founder of SaaS. Matrix Growth Academy. Look at this series of videos he's put out called 0 to 100. He talks about a lot of this, and I think it's a must watch for anyone that is building an organization. Let's talk a little bit about pricing models. So we are entering a market, or we are now in that market, where buyers are going to be super conservative about where they spend. We're noticing that a lot of investors are pushing organizations to have a freemium version of their product, similar to what Slack and Zoom did. And then once you've got a bunch of customers using your product for free, they've gotten the value. Now you convert them into a paying customer with other modules, other features, etc. It's worked really well for Slack and Zoom and a number of other companies. And it's worked really badly for a lot of companies as well, who aren't able to convert those free customers to paying customers. So what type of organizations should consider this strategy? And the ones that are converting properly, what are they doing differently to the ones that are not?
Yeah. So depending on who watches this video, I might get in trouble, but you hear a lot of the venture capital community go from like trendy thing and just apply that like peanut butter to everything in their portfolio. Like Slack and Zoom are such unique use cases. And I've heard, like I have a company that I've been spending some time with. Their VC told them that they need to build a freemium product. They're in no way, shape, or form does this product make sense as a freemium model. There's no network effects. You can't really use it as an individual without large organizational buy-in. And yet the VC was like, oh, we should really think about building a freemium model. You heard something smart in one board meeting, and you're telling this other company to whom it's completely irrelevant. So be very careful of taking the advice you get from your VCs at like face value. A lot of them are super duper smart and add a tremendous amount of value, but it's not all. And in general, like a healthy amount of skepticism is so important as a always, but especially as an early stage company. And that applies to everything that I'm saying. Skepticism to all of it. So the companies that can really gain from a freemium model, can I use this within a company as a small group of individuals and still get value? Is that a possibility? And that's true with Slack and Zoom. Is there some sort of a network effect so that when new users start to come into this ecosystem, there's an increasing amount of value for that individual and the individuals already using it? Okay, freemium starts to make a lot of sense. Do you have the financial, and then as a company, do I have the financial wherewithal to potentially let this freemium model gain momentum over a fairly long period of time before I can convert these customers to like a more enterprise plan? And do you very clearly have a delineation of value within your product so that there's enough that people are going to want to pay for? So on top of your freemium model. So like, and there's a lot of really good stuff written online by some much smarter people than myself about when freemium makes sense. So, but in general, if some of those things are true, then it might work. But you need runway for sure. And you need, I would say, you need to be patient with that upgrade model. You need to be patient that your VCs will continue to invest money or give you runway to simply acquire users, knowing that there is some monetization in the future. Because if you don't have that alignment, then it's going to be really challenging to make succeed. But yeah, freemium is like the flavor of the day right now. Yeah. So I would be cautious with pursuing that unless it makes a whole ton of sense for your business.
Yeah, the same investors who, and listen, just as Charles said, there's some fantastic investors out there and there's some really shitty ones as well. So like, if you think about it, the same investors are saying you've got to have a path to profitability. It's got to be sooner towards profit than ever before. And the same ones are saying, well, go to freemium, which takes a lot longer to get to profit as well. So you've just got to always get a second opinion on any advice that you get. Let's
really talk clear in that conversation. Like if you hear that, because it's really easy, your VCs, they've been in the industry for whatever, they've given you all this money. It's like, you don't want to question them. So, but it's important when something like that happens and you hear a bit of this sort of contradictory asks, to be like, hey, let me just pause. I know that, we had one conversation about a path to profitability, but now we're talking about freemium. Those seem to be in conflict. I just want to make sure we are aligned with one of those, or the two of them that are going to, like have those challenging conversations with your VCs. I'm glad you brought that up.
And understand their business as well. Like if they're only seed and Series A round investors, and they're not going to be there for your next round anyway, then like that advice, like they might not know what it takes to get to that next stage. So always just understand their business models, how they make money, who they invest in, how their portfolios are doing. Mm-hmm. And it really helps you understand what piece of advice to take and which ones to kind of let to the side and take somebody else's. Let's talk. We have a little bit more time. First and foremost, I know I'd said anyone can tell me to shut up, but I just keep talking. So let me stop and ask, does anyone have questions?
So we do have one question that came in. Yeah, Zoltan, it's from you there, buddy. Do you want to go off mute for a second and ask?
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. You mentioned when you were talking about the sales representatives that, of course, at the commencement of a company, the founder and the CEO should lean in and make the first steps to make the first cold leads. But how long should the founder really stay involved in the day-to-day sales? Is the founder becoming a burden after a certain moment of time when sales shall become like a day-to-day boring chasing of the most profitable leads? So what do you think? How long should the founder be involved in the day-to-day selling process at all?
Yeah, as a founder, you want to extricate yourself from the low-value work as quickly as possible. Because maybe at the beginning as a founder, you're actually sending cold emails, you're setting up initial appointments. You want to get out of that type of work that is easy for other people to do as quickly as possible. That's where your first BDR is great. Could be responding to emails, and there's a bunch of that stuff where you don't need to be the founder to do it. As the founder, you want, like, forever, you should, well, maybe not forever, for your A, B, C rounds, you're always going to be involved in the very biggest deals that the company's doing, because those deals should be big enough and scary enough that the other company, your customer wants to see the founder and talk to them. And it's important and impactful enough as a company for me as the CEO to be in that room. And if you're not having those conversations, it probably means you need to orient some of your resources to those like game-changing, whale type deals, where you're going to continue to engage. So my opinion is the founder should always stay engaged in your biggest deals. But as the sales team's acumen comes up and they can start to win deals at a certain level of repeatability, at a certain conversion rate, then you can exit a lot of those conversations. But you measure it. You're going to be in some $15,000 deals or some $10,000 deals and not in others, and look at your conversion rate. And then you just have to have think to yourself as the founder, like, where are my resources best spent? The interesting thing is, like, a lot of founders are technical in nature, and you're like, well, I'm a product person. How quickly can I get back to being a product person? Well, the disappointing thing is, like, the CEO oftentimes is like not a product person at all after you're like Series A. They raise money, they get people to join the company, like they're the number one cheerleader and recruiter, and they're the company's like best salesperson. And salesperson doesn't mean you have to be Captain Charisma, the sort of like cliched slick talking sales guy, but you should be the person that can build trust, have an opinion, and really get people to understand like the vision for why to use this product or work with this company. That's the sad thing about a product person being a CEO, is like, you don't get to be a product person.
And sometimes sales guys see more where the profitability lies. So as a founder, you always have your package, have your history with you. And when you have a professional sales guy, probably you should trust him to find where the money is, even if it seems a little bit boring for the first hearing.
Yeah. And the CEO needs to take it upon themselves to learn the craft of sales. Like you don't really get the option. You don't get to be the CEO unless you're willing to do it. That's just sort of the deal, because it relates to raising money and all these other things. But you don't need to do it in a way that feels inauthentic. I think that's the thing that scares a lot of product CEOs is, like salespeople, they're tricksters and they're saying a bunch of funny stuff and getting people to sign contracts. Like, that doesn't need to be, and more the world of sales is less and less like that. You can do it in a way that's authentic to yourself. Like, you don't need to learn all the tricks of the trade. You just need to be able to understand, like, how do I ask good questions, understand the person's business that I'm talking to, paint a vision for the future, tell compelling stories about my customers. Like, there's some of these things that require none of the cliches that are really powerful skills to learn as a CEO. And the science, like especially as like an engineering type individual, the systems thinking that you'll bring to sales is really, really powerful, because your first sales reps, they're just reps, and they might not come from like a finance or like any science backgrounds. So your first manager might be the same. So you bringing a systems thinking approach to understanding how this model stitches together is really critical as well. You can engage in a way that doesn't feel inauthentic and salesy.
35 to 40% of your workforce is going to sit between sales and marketing. 35 to 40% of your budget is going to go towards sales and marketing. So as a CEO, you've got to understand that really well. And like what Kyle said, the ones who take a very engineering perspective to it, they thrive. Like, I would point you towards the books that the founder Winning by Design has written. His name is Jaffo. Winning by Design would be probably, in my mind, the number one sales consultancy focused on SaaS. Read those books. Like, he's a scientist writing them out, and it'll help you a lot. We are coming towards the end of this, so we appreciate you guys attending. Kyle, thank you so much, brother, for doing this. We appreciate your time. Obviously, if anyone has follow-up questions, let Blake know. He'll let us know, and somehow or the other, you'll get an answer. Otherwise, good luck. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Kyle. Thanks, Asad. Just before you guys, before Kyle and Asad leave, just want to say another huge thank you. Constant supporters of the DMZ, and really great to have you both here today. That hour flew by. I feel like it was only 10 minutes. There's so much to talk about sales, but again, just a huge thank you to both, and hope to see you both again soon.